Hey guys, it's SD, your host of the Life Picks Relationship podcast, where people with all sorts of backgrounds, challenges, and life experience show us how they make their relationship extraordinary.
Hey guys, hope you're having an awesome day. Have you checked out the YouTube channel yet? Those of you who have told me they loved it. If not, you could go to Life Picks Relationships right now and see me talking and my facial expressions. Yes, I am known for that. See, you guys have awesome ideas. So many of you asked for it to go on YouTube. Now it is, and I'm so happy you're enjoying it. So today's podcast is also a highly requested topic. So many people asked, how can you go and disagree, have an argument with your partner? And that is what we are going to talk about today. When I saw this person who specializes in being able to talk to people who have different opinions, who have different views, and still have a decent conversation, so that way you could really go and understand the other person, I was like, I need to speak to her. She's the author of Pursue, Don't Preach. That's her website too, by the way, in case you want to go and find out more about it. I'm going to put all the links in the show notes as usual. Thank you so much, Karen Tibbals, for being here. I am so excited to speak to you about this because I know the listeners really want to hear what you have to say.
Thanks for having me.
Okay. You have this like really cool and interesting topic. And I want to know first, how did you get started into this type of work?
Oh my goodness, it's quite a story. So I spent years working in marketing in a number of different industries, but most of the time in the pharmaceutical industry. I also worked at an advertising agency. And I would help the manufacturers that I worked with, and then sometimes for, to try to figure out how to better sell their pharmaceutical drugs. And I worked in categories like high blood pressure and schizophrenia and, important drugs that people really need. And then I had a religious calling, and I felt I needed to go to seminary. So I left my job. I volunteered to be laid off. I left my job and I went to seminary, and I thought what I was going to do was I was going to start a organization to support people who wanted to apply their religious faith to their business life. And I did do that with a couple of other women. We started this, and it's still running, but I walked away after a few years because I decided it wasn't for me. They just didn't match what I'm really good at. I'm not good at leading an organization, but I'm a great researcher. And what I love is looking at applications of theories and how it helps you change your view of the world and how you look at things. And while I was in seminary, I found this theory, and this theory just changed everything I believed about what motivates people to act. And I'll go back to my career, which was in pharmaceutical marketing. And I thought I knew what motivated people, but I totally changed my mind based on this theory.
So what's this theory? I'm like so curious.
It's called moral foundations theory. And it was originated by two gentlemen by the name of Jesse Graham and Jonathan Haidt. And Jonathan Haidt wrote a popular book called The Righteous Mind, which is where I read it. And then I started doing research on it. And I also found another two gentlemen, these are men, but these other two guys who had found a way to use the theory to find a way to talk to people in a way that they could understand. And that's just such a powerful concept. And it goes back to my original working in an advertising agency, which is, so when I thought of the name for the book that I've written, I've thought of the term Persuade, Don't Preach. And here I am, spent years persuading people in marketing, and then went to seminary, learned to preach. And, so the title really represents the arc of my career. And now I'm spending my time talking to people about the book, and I give presentations to groups and people who are really disturbed by the way this country is headed and want to do something, and hope that they can do something better. So that's what I'm doing these days.
Okay, so what is the theory in practical words?
Okay, so what Hyde and Graham identified is we all have the same 5 underlying motivations, or they call them moral foundations. And this is true across cultures, across every single group. Everybody has the same 5, but we don't see it because we put different importance on them and we have different interpretations of them. So let me give you an example. One of them, well, I'll tell you the first 5. I'll tell you.
Yeah, I was like, I first need to know that. My brain's curiosity is just exploding.
So the basic fundamental one is belonging. So the group that you belong to has a tremendous influence on what you think and what you believe and what you do. And that influences the interpretation of the other 4. The next one I'll talk about is respect for authority. And you see a huge difference between conservatives and liberals in this country, in the US, and you see the difference actually around the world in terms of the degree of respect for authority. But that doesn't mean...
This second one is the need to respect authority or the belief that people should respect authority?
The actual respect you hold for authority.
Okay.
And who you respect.
Okay.
Because everybody respects authority. Some people more
their
than
authority.
What?
The people who they decide are their authority that they want to respect.
Exactly right. The next one is sacredness and purity. The two go together. And conservatives are higher in sacredness and purity. And the difference in interpretation is that for the people on the right-hand side of the spectrum, conservatives the imagery is much more religious based. And for people who are not on that spectrum, it's more based in nature, or like organic food, or not having GMOs, pure food. Clean eating is a manifestation of the sacredness and purity. The fourth one is care for others. And that's kind of self-explanatory. And the 5th one is fairness. And liberals tend to be higher on the last 2. Now, fairness also has this difference. There's actually 3 forms of fairness. There's fairness where everybody's equal. There's fairness where you deserve more if you try harder. And there's fairness to make up for people who were disadvantaged in the past. So like affirmative action is a form of fairness. Communism, socialism is a form of fairness. And capitalism is a different form of fairness. Where
type of fairness.
If you work harder, you get more money, And so what you see is that people will use the same word, but they mean different things. And then they get into arguments where there's not something's fair, and they realize that they're just talking past each other because they don't realize that they're using one particular form of fairness and the other person is using a different form.
Yeah, I always say that, I think I'm making up numbers totally, but I would guess about 50% of our arguments, maybe more, would just disappear if before we start the argument, we define what we're arguing about. Like you said, what does fairness mean? Or any fight that you would have with your partner. You're just completely disagreeing 2 different things. So how could you even have a conversation about that?
And this goes on over and over again. I mean, I've gotten to the point now when I read a news story, I've got a pen in my hand and I'm underlining words like fairness. And I'm going, okay, here's the definition they're using. Because it's so interesting to see how different people use the term. Now, that said, we each have our own personal form that we favor of fairness, but we also have all the other ones in us. And we use them in different circumstances. And let me give you an example. I was just listening to an interview with Michael Sandel, who's written a book about meritocracy, which is one of the forms of fairness, right? And he's saying that it's a toxic form, and he's going on and on. And I'm listening to it and I'm going, okay, well, that's an interesting thing. But these same people are also making arguments of equality. So in some circumstances, you use one, and in other circumstances, you use another. And to realize when you are making that switch, and so this self-awareness that I've gained from this, and then awareness to hear it in other people, is just changing the way I look at the world. It really has.
So cool for you. I need to hear about that, you personally. But before that, I want to get a better understanding of, so we have these 5 types of value. Like, what do you call them? Values? 5 types of?
You can use values. They call them moral foundations.
Moral foundations.
Yeah, I call them ethical zones, because I think what I've done in the book is I've said, okay, those 5 are good, but there's also the times where you need to do a deep analysis of stuff and make rational decisions based on, which one is financially better, because I come from a business background, and businesses are accused of being unethical because they don't take into account care for others, which is a moral foundation. But they also have to take into account how much money they're going to make. They can't they can't go out of business because they're taking care of people.
They're a business and they're meant to be making money. Yeah.
Right. So I added in the 6th one, which I call rationality or reason.
I like that one. I think that one's my favorite one.
And then I added in a 7th one, which is, I call it the ethical zone of understanding. And that's where you really start to understand what's driving yourself and other people, and start to be able to see it. And that's when you can talk to people in a different way, when you can get to that level.
So cool. So we have these 5 ethical zones, 7 ethical zones, really. Now, once you know these 5, how does that apply to your own personal life? Not to a person who's listening. Once they know these 7, how do they go and, like, now, so I have this information. Now, what do I do with it?
Well, you start looking and listening and thinking, and think about how it would change if you looked at things slightly differently, and start looking for what you have in common. Like, for instance, certain people like a particular politician, and other people don't, and you can't understand why the people like the politician that much. Well, it might be because they have really high respect for authority, and they really need to have that kind of authority, and that person has taken on that role for them. And maybe that's what's going on. And so maybe it becomes clearer what's going on, and you can start to not be as upset with people when you realize that. So one of the principles that I put in my book, that I really got from Haidt's book, is that we need to separate the person themselves from the position they take on an issue, from the value that's underneath of it. So if somebody likes this particular politician and took a position on an issue that you hate, don't hate the person, because the person is supporting that politician because of a value. And that value is something that you share. Everybody has the same ones. We just are different in how we express them. So we need to understand that, and then we can start to say, okay, and then we can talk about it. We can. One of my basic things I'm trying to teach people to do is, let's not talk about the issues. Let's talk about the values that are driving it.
Yes.
So when you hear somebody say something, you say, "Oh, is that because you think this person is a great authority figure? Is that because of the group you belong to? Is that because you find this sacred?" And I want to change the conversations that we're having.
I think that's really interesting. I'm just like imagining in my mind, like 2 people really heated, let's say a couple who's having an argument about anything. It could be about what school to send their kids to, a financial decision, I don't care what. And obviously they're each having their own opinion based on one of these values that they're having, right? But I could imagine in like these topics that get very heated really quickly. And I could see, like, if a couple were to say, like, "Oh, so you're thinking that because authority is really important to you." I already see the other person just exploding and walking out of the room.
Okay, so I've got a system.
Okay, let's hear that.
Okay, the first part is it's ALAR.
ALAR. Okay.
A is for ask. Don't assume. Ask.
Yes.
Ask questions.
And then ask more questions and more
And ask
questions,
more questions.
and even more questions.
Yes, yes, yes. Then L is for listen. Don't just ask the questions, listen to them.
Yes.
And listen with new ears. Listen with ears that are attuned to hear what's underneath. Because we make these assumptions and we don't check out the assumptions. So once you know what the ethical zones are, you can say, oh, so, you've just told me that what's important to you is let's say school choice for your child. What's important to you is the people that he's going to meet. So that's that's the belonging ethical zone that you really think that that's important. And so then you listen for that, and then so A, ask, you ask the question to find that out. L,
You listen.
Figure that out where they're coming from. Then the second A is affirm. So find a point of agreement. Even if it's not to the major point, just find something you can agree with. And, in this particular circumstance, maybe you can agree that the people that your kid is going to get to meet are important to you. It's not unimportant, right?
I think that when we look at this when you're having a conversation in such a way, then it's much easier and to find something they agree with. All of a sudden, you're agreeing on so many more things because you're not banging head to heads on a stupid thing, but rather really trying to understand. So there's much more things that you could affirm with. Yeah. Okay.
Right. And then finally, the R is for reframe. And what reframe is to say, so you've already said, I agree with you that, who our kids going to hang out with, it's really important. I know also you're very concerned about money and how much money we have, and I'm really concerned about the cost of sending our child to that school. And so now you've turned it into, that's the rationality, that's the money. But it also might be that you're afraid that you're not going to have money in your old age. So there might be concern about safety and security, which is part of the sacredness moral foundation. And you could be clear about that. But until you've applied that analysis to your own self to understand what's going on in you, then you can't say that. So you've got to really understand yourself. So this system has helped me understand myself. Let me give you an example. In my marriage with my husband, for many years, we would have an argument over the messiness of where we live. And I am not a typical woman. I'm the messy one, okay? And he's the very neat one. And he would use the word filth, to describe the mess. And I was like, wait, it's not dirty, it's messy. What is he talking about?
Is a difference.
And I was just mystified for what was going on. And, we were having the same argument over and over again, and we never got out of it until finally, when I started working with this theory, and I looked at the list of words that are in the sacredness moral foundation, and there's the words dirt and filth and clean. That's what he was talking about. It's not just the mess, it's what the mess means to him, and it's a violation of the sacredness that he needs for his personal space.
I like that so much. So once you understood that, how did that change your perspective on things?
We haven't had that same argument again.
Oh, wow. Wow. I'm already thinking about all the arguments that people have, and then half of them could just go away because of this.
Yeah, because wow. I didn't totally change, but we could negotiate a settlement. Once I could understand what was really behind him, yes, we could negotiate a settlement that we can both live with. Now, I'm still a mess. I still create messes everywhere, but I close the door on my mess. And
sure, when you understand the other person, when you understand yourself, it's so much easier to figure it out because, like we said, we're not fighting over, like, who said it recently on the podcast? Jen, she was talking about, like, she's usually not, the fight isn't usually about who left the toaster on the counter. There's a reason behind it, like what's going on there. Or like recently, actually, on different episode, Brendan from Master Talk, he was talking about how some people, they argue about everything, or they say like, oh, I need to talk about, this is really important, this is crucial. And he said there's, what he has done, they decided to only use the word important when it's like really important. If it's not urgent, like really, really important, then they don't use the word important. So now they know when they use the word important, it really means important. So it goes along the same sort of thing of being able to understand what meaning are we putting into this word, so that way we could go to work this out.
Right.
Okay, so this is our thing of starting of asking, listening, affirming, and reframing.
So you go to the values, use the language of the values that are important to the other person, not just yours. As one of my favorite academics says, the way we usually argue is we rehearse the reasons we would use for ourselves. And so we have to start thinking about what arguments are important, what the moral foundations the other person has. So my husband was higher in sacredness in that particular way. So when I started using that language back to him, that's what changed the argument.
Yeah, you know what it reminds me of, just so for people to understand even better, like we all know that the 5 love languages, and the ones that are ours and the ones that are our partners. And usually in the beginning, before people know about this, then they give love in their love language. So if they love touch, then they touch a lot. If they love gifts, then they give gifts a lot, without realizing that their partner doesn't want it. As soon as you understand that your partner wants a different love language, then it's easier to go and give it to them. So same thing here. As soon as you understand your partner's values, then you know which words to use to them, what type of sentences to tell them, so that way they feel that you're really listening to them, connecting them, and I'm really understanding them.
Yes, exactly right. And it lets you move on. Like it changes the conversation. You don't have the same arguments over and over again. And you really can come to a better understanding of each other.
Yeah, so cool. Now, how has this work changed your own personal life?
I was a coward. I still am. About interpersonal interactions, and I hated conflict. I still hate conflict, but because I know this technique now and I've been practicing it, I have started using it in discussions and in situations where I wouldn't never have said anything. For instance, I'll give you an example. I was out for a walk and I ran into a group of neighbors, and there was somebody there that I hadn't met. We were talking a little bit, and the woman brought, I don't know what it was. Anyways, the issue came up of gay marriage. And she said she was a Catholic, and she thought that civil unions were okay, but she thought marriage was sacred. Well, that's something I've studied, and I've studied how to talk about it, and I've written how to talk about it, and that's in the book. And I was able to say something to her to say that they believe that their marriage should be sacred also. There was no further discussion. That was just the end of it. I got to say something that was important to me. There was no confrontation. It wasn't a difficult conversation. It just was over.
I like that so much. I'm like, my mind's like blowing now, like racing of what would be if people would only use this and realize that there's so much more to everything.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. If you had this knowledge while you were in marketing, do you think it would have changed your job?
Oh, absolutely. And my first book was about how to do that. Because my first book is called Marketing Landmines. Because what's happening now in the marketing field is that brands, not people, brands are, some of them are taking positions like Nike with Colin Kaepernick, and they're making this decision based on what they think is the right thing to do. And I'll put right in quotes because they're not really thinking about what's right for their customers. They're thinking about what their view of morally right is.
My question is if it's what their view of morally right is or what they think their customers' views morally right is.
It's probably some combination of that.
Okay.
But what they haven't thought about is that there are people who are going to be upset, and or maybe they have thought about it. I mean, some of them have thought about it and decide to go ahead anyway. And then some of them end up taking it back, and they haven't really played it out and thought about how they could deal with it. And what I say in my book is that if you really want to move the issue forward, if you really want to take a stand, if this is really important to you, there's a way to do it. Even with people who aren't necessarily in favor of it, if you use these techniques, you could change people's minds about an issue. So instead of virtue signaling, which is what a lot of marketing with the brands are, instead you could really move let's say the Black Lives Matter movement forward, if that's what you want. But they aren't to that level yet. So I wrote
much deeper stuff for them. They're like, can't get there that fast.
So I wrote the book. That one it's over a year old. That was the first book because that's where I first thought about how to apply these theories. And then what happened is I would talk about the theories to friends of mine, people I would run into, and they would say, "Oh, I want to read about it. I want to read your book." And the only book was the marketing book. So they'd get the marketing book, and then they'd say, "Well, that's really interesting, but how can I use that in my life?"
Yeah. So that's awesome. Okay. Now, does it ever happen that even if you're trying to understand someone, okay, that you disagree so much with why they value that? Meaning, like, let's say equal, right? We all want equal and we all define equal in different ways. Now, what happens if I define equal one way, you define equal another way, and we have to make a decision together? And even if I understand where you're coming from, how do we work things out?
Well, it doesn't work it's not perfect. This is a system that totally works 100% of the time.
Ways to get rid of the argument parts of it.
It's a tool, but there's other tools that can be used. And I've identified, this isn't in the book, but it's in my newsletter that I'm working on now, which you can get the link to from my website. So there's two tools that are used have been recently developed. So this is all new psychology research. One is called deep canvassing. And deep canvassing is where, again, it goes in the same system where you ask a bunch of questions about why people feel this way. So it's the same kind of questions.
My favorite thing, because everyone knows I just love asking questions.
And then what happens is that you end up finding a point of commonality. So back to the affirm. So it's the same sort of thing, but it's a different technique and maybe slightly different questions.
What is different specifically about this?
You're not necessarily looking for the underlying values. You're looking for them to express their feelings.
Okay.
So, and
in a way, okay.
For instance, the study that was done where they proved that this worked was about a campaign to increase approval for transgender rights. So these deep canvassers went out, and some of them were trans people and some of them weren't. And they engaged people and asked questions like, have you ever felt like you didn't belong? Did you ever feel like they tried to elicit people to feel sympathetic to the plight of trans people. So different kinds of questions.
In a way, I think that for people that are listening and are just starting out with that, it might be easier until you really understand the values really well and you could really ask questions to understand the values, just to have your partner express themselves and how they're feeling. It might be easier to just start with that.
Yeah,
Ask those
I get it.
questions so you understand that. And then when you feel ready to move even forward, go and bring in the values part.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay.
And what they found was about 10% of the people switched their opinion several months later, which has never been seen before.
Wow.
Well, it's not everybody by any means.
It will take time. And I don't think that especially the goal has to be to change people, how they view, because we don't want everyone thinking the same thing. That's
Right.
not, the world won't run like that. But the point is more to be able to understand where they're coming from.
Exactly. Exactly. And then the other technique that I'm working with that isn't in the book is called, and this is a weird name, the illusion of explanatory effect.
What's that?
So this is a theory that says that we think we know a lot more than we actually know.
I think that the more you know, the more you realize you don't know.
Well, they first did these studies with asking people if they knew how a toilet worked or how a zipper worked. And, these are mechanical things that are relatively complicated that we use every day. And we think we know how they work, but we don't really, because we're not that mechanically minded. We don't need to know how they work in order to work them. So we take them for granted. And then a study just came out, and I mean just came out, that did the same thing, where they ask questions about economics and investment advice. And so the way the technique works is that you ask questions, again, A for ask, but these are different questions, which is, tell me how this works. Tell me what you understand about how this works. And what happens is when people get deep into trying to explain,
They realize they can't explain.
they have no clue. And when they realize that, then then they start to listen.
So it's like a trick roundabout way of having to go and get people to listen to you.
Well, what it does more than that. All of these are all similar in one way, is that they get people to slow down their thinking process.
Actually think. Yeah.
Exactly. Right. Because one of the issues that's going on is something that's called high need for cognitive closure, where there are certain people who have a higher need to come to a decision quickly. And a lot of our problems are because somebody makes a snap judgment, and if once they be brought to think through that snap judgment in a gentle way and unconfrontational, because confrontation doesn't make them sit back. But once you get them to start thinking through what is behind their decision and how they get to it, then they start to reconsider it. And I think that's what's behind everything that I've just been talking about this whole time. So slow down the conversation and by asking questions. Different kinds of questions work in different ways, but they're all ways to slow down the conversation.
I love that, and really get you just thinking and understanding what's going on here.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Amazing. Okay. Last question that I ask everyone. How would you describe an extraordinary relationship without using the word love, connection, and intimacy?
Ooh. Spiritual.
Does that say something about your values?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, I went to seminary.
Awesome.
But I think that the relationships that we have that are on a very deep level are on a soul level.
Yeah. Yeah, I truly agree with that. Yeah, for sure. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Karen. This was really interesting. And I really hope that people start asking more questions and understanding more what's going on. And maybe
Slow things down.
Slow things down. Yeah. Real conversations with your partner, that will for sure just create a deeper connection. Awesome. Thank you so much. Did you enjoy that episode? Could you do me a personal favor and subscribe and leave a review? It would mean a lot to me. Thank you so much and have an awesome day.